I want to thank Jewelers Mutual for sponsoring these talks. And I'm going to introduce Sarah Darrow, who is going to introduce our presenters, and then we're going to have a Q&A moderated conversation after.
Thanks so much, Brianne. All right, first up we have Shane R. Hendren, a multidisciplinary artist recognized for his intricate jewelry and metalwork, which honors the culture and traditions of his Navajo and European ancestors. His work can be found in public and private collections around the world, including the British Museum and the Herd Museum. He was named Artist of the Year 4 times by the Indian Arts and Crafts Association and is a recipient of the 2023 Maxwell Hammerman Awards in Craft in partnership with the United States Artists. Please, everybody give a hand, a big round of applause for Shane.
So I'm Shane Hendren, for those of you who don't know me. And 30 plus years ago, I became a jeweler by accident. And we won't get into that because my talk is about the indigenous persistence of jewelry. And in my 30 plus years as a jeweler, one of the interesting things that I've been able to do is serve on different boards and everything. And at one time I was on the board for the Indian Arts and Crafts Association. And as a result of that, I was invited to the British Museum in 2012 to be part of their International Turquoise Conference. And I was there as an indigenous modern representation of how turquoise was still being utilized by indigenous artists in the Americas in modern day. There was actually 3 of us. There was me, there was Yazzie Johnson, and there was Gail Berg. We were all there as presenters. But what we were talking about was these mosaic pieces from Mesoamerica. And the thing that was important about them, and the reason why it's relative to us today as jewelers and metalsmiths, is when the Spanish came to Central and South America, any gold or silver that they found, they melted it down and sent it back to Europe. So I was in Paris this past summer, and it was really tough for me because all of the gold that you see on those picture frames and everything, it came from the Americas. It was my ancestors' gold that they melted down and then gilded those picture frames with. That's what they built those cities and that wealth with, as well as our food. 80% of the foods that we eat today come from the Americas. It's a crazy thing when you think about it. So all of this quote-unquote civilization that occurred would not have been possible if it wasn't for indigenous peoples of the Americas. Now, the reason why that's relative here is because these mosaics, what we had is we had anthropologists, we had archaeologists, we had metalsmiths, we had chemists, we had guys from the petroleum industry in Canada that were doing all kinds of experiments because we were identifying where the turquoise came from. They spent 5 years going around and going to mines, extracting turquoise, testing it. In fact, Tucson, ASU here was involved in that. They have, in their chemistry department, they were doing a lot of testing as well to help us find out where the turquoise and everything came from. And what we learned from these mosaics is these mosaics were proof that prior to contact by Europeans, the Americas, from one tip to the other, were completely connected. Because these could not have occurred without extensive international trade that was occurring. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And one of those key trade centers was Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, where my family ranches at Chaco Canyon. Our ranch borders Chaco Canyon on the south side and the west side. So I grew up there. And when you would ride across the pastures, you would find these caches of turquoise and everything, because turquoise was the primary thing that they traded at Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon was a trade hub for primarily turquoise. So this is Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon. If you look at these maps up here, you can see a lot of the stuff that we were looking at, the mosaics, were from the Aztecan culture, which was primarily around Mexico City area. So that's approximately 1,500 miles from Chaco Canyon. Keep in mind, everybody is walking. If you average 15 miles a day walking, that's 100 days of travel from Chaco Canyon to Mexico City if you're just going from one spot to the other straight on. It's crazy, right? We've all heard about the Cocopelli. What the Cocopelli is that's a representation of these traders who carry their packs on their backs. and were traveling throughout the Americas between all these locations. This international trade was going on. Can you go back real quick? So if you look at these mosaics, it's not just turquoise. You have conch shell, you have spiny oyster shell, some of the other, like this one on the bottom has a bunch of gems in the mouth, spinial and different things like that. The teeth are shark's teeth. You know, the eyes, it has a pearl on top of its head. You couldn't have made these objects without this international trade that was happening from coast to coast and tip of tip. A lot of them are done on wood. So the wood came from Central and South America, for example. The resins, the bee resins, as well as the glues and everything, came from the rainforest. So they're gathering all these materials, and then they're coming into artist communities where they're making these things. It's this entire artist industry. Go ahead to the next one. So prior to European contact, you have this extensive trade network that's going on. Go ahead and go again. And you have all of this trade that's happening. Now, if you guys have a chance while you're in Tucson, go to the Tucson Museum of Art, because this stuff that I'm showing you now is all on exhibit there now. We have very, very little examples of pre-contact metalwork by indigenous American artisans, because they melted it all down. As soon as they got here, as soon as they found gold and silver, they took it, they melted it down, they turned it into ingots, and they shipped it to Europe. So we have very, very few examples, but these are all different examples of indigenous artisans' gold work. This is all gold work. So it's a misnomer that we were unsophisticated, that we didn't have a tradition of metalsmithing prior to European contact. In fact, they were doing things with gold and silver that was never done anywhere else in the world, and we haven't been able to duplicate to this day. A lot of gilding, a lot of mixing of metals and things that they were able to do that we still haven't figured out how they did it. So hocus pocus was magic. Go ahead. Here's some other examples. I love this fox one. That's copper. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's about 9 inches by 10 inches. It's really quite large. So this is copper that they smelted. They turned it into a sheet, and then they forged it. This is not cast, it's a forged piece, and then it has different shells and everything incorporated into it. So they're also setting those shells into the eyes and everything to create that look. And then if you look on this side, you have silver and gold pieces that are all chasing and repose, all prior to European contact. So people think that chasing and repose started in Italy in the 1300s or something. Well, they were doing it in Peru way before that. You know, so it's amazing stuff. And it's pretty sophisticated when you look at it, because the other thing they would do is they would gild it. So this piece on the right is silver gilded, which somehow requires electricity, right? Right? Go figure. Like today, if we want to do any plating or anything, we have to use electricity, right? So how are they hocus pocus, right? Anyhow, if the Europeans hadn't burned all the Mayan codexes and everything, you might know how they did some of this stuff. But, you know, the Spanish like to burn things. That way we would have no record of how they were done. Go ahead, go to the next one. So for me, I'm Navajo. This is Mendolito. That's who I'm. It's in. He signed the treaty of 1868, and these are photographs of early Navajo silversmiths. So a lot of people attribute Navajo silversmithing to the Mexicans. They say Navajos learned it from Mexicans and everything. But when I was doing my master's thesis, part of my thesis was about story making. And every story has a maker. And every story is some form of propaganda, right? We're trying to sell somebody something. We're trying to convince them of something. So a story maker has to determine what that propaganda is going to be, right? So I'm a descendant of Mendolito and Juanita. And the clan that I come from, is the only clan that goes back to one woman. And there is a lot of controversy about her origins. So my mom is a molecular biologist and organic chemist. And we grew up ranching, we raised cattle and horses, so we deal with genetics and everything all the time. And she says, Shane, DNA doesn't lie. She's like, if you want to know what you are, get your DNA tested. So my mitochondrial DNA, if I go back 6 generations, which was Juanita, is Peruvian. Well, if we go back and look at some of that gold work, that was all Incas from Peru. Interesting, right? Further examples of how Peru, which is on one of the furthest tips of South America, is connected to Chaco Canyon, where I grew up. All this trade was going on, all this stuff, all this international border crossing, quote unquote, because the borders didn't exist until Europeans came. We're all connected, we're all related. So it's an irony that we're dealing with the stuff we're dealing with now. I'm not going to get political, but if you think about it for just a minute, all these brown people are actually from here. The borders are arbitrary. But what I wanted you to see in this stuff is you have to question, because there's nowhere that I have found that it's documented that a Mexican showed up one day and taught a Navajo how to do silversmithing. Somebody made that story up because that was the easiest way for them to explain how we got this technology, right? But if my ancestor somehow got here from Peru and is a descendant of these people who have this pre-existing metalsmithing culture and technology, who's to say they didn't bring that technology with them? And in some form or another, it got passed down. And then, yes, when the Mexicans got here and the Spanish got here, there was new technologies, and it all became a conglomeration, right? It's all about storytelling. It's all about looking at things and seeing the realities of things and not just believing the propaganda. Okay, go ahead and go to the next one. So these are examples. If you look at the Navajo silversmithing began to flourish in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Does anybody know why? Tourism, trade. Tiffany and Company was using turquoise in European jewelry. Turquoise was very popular in European jewelry at this time. So turquoise in any form became popular. And because turquoise was being mined in the Southwest, now going back to those mosaics I showed you earlier, all the turquoise in those mosaics were mined in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. None of that turquoise came from Mexico. So these pre-existing ancient mines existed, especially south of Santa Fe, Mexico, the Cerritos mine. And that's where the Tiffany mine is located. Tiffany Company's mine is south of Santa Fe. They wanted the bird's eye blue turquoise. And that was more prevalent in Persia, which is Iran. So they were getting most of that from Iran. But that Tiffany mine is south of Santa Fe, and that's where that quote-unquote Tiffany turquoise supposedly all of it came from. But the majority of the Tiffany turquoise is Iranian, is Persian. So because it became popular, Navajos were very good craftsmen, and they were cheap labor. It always comes back to labor. So why is so much jewelry produced in Asia right now? We all pay the same price for our materials. We all essentially pay the same price for our energy and everything. The only thing that you can save money on to increase your profit margin, cheap labor. So jewelry production oftentimes follows cheap labor. Well, that's what was happening with the Navajos. They were highly skilled craftspeople, but they were cheap labor. And they were able to start producing stuff for what would become the tourist industry. So early examples, like the bracelet on top is an ingot bracelet where you're casting it, and there's no saw work there. Everything you see there, they cut that with chisels. And then all the markings are either stamps or file marks. So there's no saw work or anything like that. It's very sophisticated when you consider the limited tools that they have available to them. Go back real quick. Look at this silversmith on the top. That's a bellows. That's what he's using to melt the silver and heat the silver. No torches or anything. There were no torches at that time. So he's using a bellows and coals. That's how he's melting the silver. You guys can't even imagine that, can you? Because we all flick it and light it, and there's a torch, and we've got all this fire. But this guy's got to have somebody pumping the air, heating the coals. They've got a crucible here. They're melting the silver. They're having to watch it. No thermometers or anything. They get to melting tin. They got to know when to pour it. It's a whole deal, right? Okay, go ahead. The example on the bottom right. This example on the left is a Kyoto. It's a bogart, and I love this pattern because it's a very. So we have these ideas of what Indian jewelry looks like, right, in our minds. And this doesn't look quote unquote Navajo, right? With this heart that's integrated, which looks like a face. It looks almost African to me. But this is something that was being produced by Navajo jewelers they had no outside influences at this time. They're producing from what they see within their communities and their cultures and everything. And this is chasing ripples out. Once again, using very minimal tools, they're doing chasing rivers in. And keep in mind, look at all of these have bezel set stones. So that means that they also have to make their own solders. They have to be sophisticated enough to figure out how to alloy the materials to make their own solders and everything. With all of those very rudimentary tools that they're utilizing. This bracelet on the bottom right here is an example of manufactured wire. So now they start bringing manufactured wire, mainly from Kansas City, from the Midwest. I worked for Rio Grande for a number of years. And that was one of the reasons why Saul Bell came from Kansas City to Albuquerque. His first jewelry shop was in the basement of a trading post on Central Avenue in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And his primary clientele were Native American jewelers. And he was bringing in manufactured and wire and stuff so that they could make jewelry faster, right? Because it's all about profit margin. You gotta make it faster, you gotta make it cheaper. So that's when you see stuff like this coming in, which is pre-manufactured wire and everything. And I chose this bracelet because snakes are a motif that Navajos typically do not work in. But in a lot of very early work, you see a lot of snake motifs. So I don't know why they were doing it. Was it a demand of the market, or was it their own personal expression? Who knows? Go ahead. These are examples of my work. So I've continued that legacy. And what I've done, because I grew up ranching, my dad is from Northwest Arkansas, Eastern Oklahoma, and I come from a long ranching background. I grew up around a lot of heavily adorned equipment, bridles, bits, saddles, things like that. And as an artist over the years, they always telling me that I had to choose. Was I an Indian jeweler? Was I a cowboy jeweler? You know, which box are you going to be in, Shane? You got to choose a box. I don't fit into boxes. So I decided that I was going to do work that was representative of who I was. So that's why you see the stuff that I do. I do a lot of hollow forming, I do a lot of heavy silver work, I do a lot of hand engraving, things like that. But I started out doing Ope Omojola. So if you guys Google me, you'll see some of my older work at my website and thing. Next page. No, you should have one more. Oh, never mind, that's it. You didn't have to Google me. So save your questions until question and answer time. Who's next?
Next we have Luci Jockel, an artist and educator in Baltimore. She received her MFA from Rhode Island School of Design in jewelry and metalsmithing in 2016. She was the recipient of the ACC's Emerging Voices Award in 2019 and has exhibited her work both nationally and internationally. She is the metalsmithing and jewelry lecturer and area coordinator at Tucson University. Her work is in the collections of the Renwick Gallery, RISD Museum, Gallery Marge, and more, and is represented by Gallery Luke. Please welcome Luci. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you to SNAG for inviting me to be here. This is my first time at the Tucson Gem Show. I'm not excited to spend too much money on and continue collecting more stones. So today I want to talk about my work and how I see the connection between insects and diamonds. A little story to start. So in 2016, I visited Paris for a textile show, which my mother, who's an artist as well, was showing at. And we walked by a stationery store and saw drawings of insects. And I was really interested in insects at the time and using that in my work. And so we stopped by the shop, and there I met the artist who was Eric Tutugni, and he was the owner of the store and an artist who drew and painted the insects. And we talked about our love for insects, and I purchased his book, to which he left me the note, "These insects like diamonds." And ever since then, that's really rung in my ears. It's what I had explored in my work leading up to meeting him, and it was just like a kind of quick way to kind of state what I've always been trying to say kind of in my work, where I'm replacing the gemstones with insects and kind of comparing the two, and as well as other fragile materials besides insect specimen that I found to be more valuable beyond monetary value. This was a series I started with when I was going to grad school at Rhode Island School of Design. And I started with the series of bone rings and steel, and really taking out the monetary value that's expected in jewelry. So steel isn't something that's super expensive or considered a precious metal. And setting the animal bones like I would with stone. So these are muskrat teeth and mouse vertebrae, snake vertebrae, and they're very small scale bones. And also beetle remains, and kind of like rearranging them and creating wearable pieces of art with the beetle remains. And thinking about the balance between grotesque and beauty and kind of inviting people into something with pattern and color, and then to be confronted with something that's kind of makes you uneasy maybe, and I love that balance. I did a series of brooches to mourn honeybees. I got really into honeybees and just bees in general and pollinating insects after watching a documentary about them, and hearing about the colony collapse disorder that was happening at the time, and thinking a lot about the value that they hold in our ecosystem and our agricultural system. And so I created, this is one of the pieces in the series, and I used different materials that were related to the bee or the plants that they pollinated. This one I just used beeswax and kind of like set the honeybee as if it were a cameo on the brooch. I started a series of making lace from honeybee wings, and the first question I always get is, where do you get honeybee wings? Some people may have thought that I killed the bees, but no bee has been killed in my work. I received them from beekeepers who lost their hives due to harsh winters. When I was working on this series at the time in Rhode Island, one of the beekeepers, I reached out to like 10 beekeepers through email, and only like 2 answered because I think it was a really weird request. Like, can I have your dead bees, please? So one of them answered and said, I actually just lost 10 of my hives, unfortunately, because the winter was just awful that year. And he said, how about in exchange for the wings, and I can also give you like honey and beeswax. You can help me rebuild the hives for the next season, and I can also teach you a little bit about beekeeping, because I didn't know anything at the time about beekeeping. So we had a really great connection. I still talk to him to this day, and he gave me a lot of the bee wings that I use in my work. So I didn't really know how to first start using them, but in this series I just kind of wanted to delicately place them in patterns. And then I started to look at Victorian mourning jewelry and attire and veils, so like the different patterns that show up in there. And I didn't exactly know where this series was going, but I'll show you in a couple slides. This piece is only like an inch by an inch, and I didn't set it in anything, it was an exploration of material. And so I started to, during my time at RISD and afterwards, I started to really think more deeply about our system of value and where animals and insects fit into that. And perhaps questioning why aren't they seen as beings, but more so for what they can provide to us. So this piece is just a photograph of a moment where I created a necklace with honey. This is a piece I made last year. I have one of these out at the artist market, where I'm replacing a gemstone with an orb of bee wings, and I'm using archival glue to connect them and putting a layer of propolis, which is like a bee resin, on top of it to harden it a little bit more. But I set it within a cage kind of wire structure so that it's still fragile, but it's protected at the same time. So this is where that original, the bee wing lace study led towards. So this is a veil made out of over 20,000 honeybee wings, so that's made up of about 10,000 bees, and it's actually less than what's in a colony of bees, if you can believe that. I think there's usually like 20 to 50,000 bees in a beehive, a bee colony usually. But this piece, this was my goal for that series ever since I started with making lace from it. I really wanted to make a mourning veil that sent the message of thinking about this animal and that it deserves to be mourned and thought of and considering its value a little bit more within our system, and what our connection is to them and having a physical connection. So this piece was only worn for the photograph, and now it will be on display at the Renwick Gallery, framed flat. I don't have an image of that, but I have a couple of their images of a little bit closer up. This took forever to make. I had help making this piece. I hosted a quilting bee, which my family was a part of, as well as my sister who's here today. Thank you. They helped me to make it, so it was kind of referencing the gathering of women and people who would come together to make a quilt. And yeah, that was a really lovely experience, and it helped to kind of complete the piece. And a couple more images. So instead of silk or gold or diamonds, using the bee wings and connecting that to the body, wearing it on the body. This is a bow of wings in place of silk ribbon. And so I've started to go beyond jewelry a little bit and more into like textile sculptural pieces. And this was photographed on the body as well. So I like to work with this really fragile material and preserve it through a photograph or in a frame. But it's really supposed to be just worn in that moment and for the photograph. And I like to work on a spectrum between preserved and transient, so like more wearable things, because there's been interest in it, but also I want to be wearing these things as well and carrying them with me. So this is a more wearable bow. It's a bolo tie, and using honeybee wings, it's set behind mineral glass to protect it, and there's also and I think of different ways to protect these really fragile structures. So I got into using stone and using it kind of like as a more functionally than as the precious material. So like using basalt or volcanic glass or obsidian. I really like their somber and like modest qualities, and they help to kind of enhance that boldness of the wings. I started to do inlay as well with obsidian and the bee wings. I made this piece during when we were quarantined during the pandemic, and was really thinking about mourning and loss of what we were all going through at the same time. And did this piece without very many tools, did it by hand, and like took a very long time to do it, so there was a lot of thought and energy that went into this piece. And I really love the transparency of this, the Midnight Lace Obsidian, for those of you who maybe know the stone, but the ribbons are from the lava that's cooling as it moves, which I think is really beautiful. And I kind of connected that to like processing and considering grief and time as well. And I continued doing inlay. So this is a piece that I made for my sister. We did an exhibition together. She's also a ceramic artist. And I did inlay on this agate with butterfly wings, morpho butterfly wings on the back of it. And it was inspired by this ring that I'm wearing today. I think I may have stolen it from her, or maybe she gave it to me. I don't remember. But yeah, so it was inspired by the turquoise set in there, but connecting that to that beautiful blue morpho wings. And this is a piece of hers on the left. where we both wanted to explore how to set rubies in different ways. So she set it in porcelain, and I did tube setting, but did it within rhodonite. And we were having conversations about sisterhood, womanhood, dreams, and secrets at that time. So this was part of the exhibition. And this was related to that as well. Finding a way to use the tubing as a rivet and a stone setting was kind of difficult, but I found it really interesting. So on the back of the labradorite, there's sapphires that are set. And then on the front, which is on the right side, that's snake vertebrae. We were thinking about Medusa as well for that exhibition. And Beetlejuice. Okay, so this is my latest series that I've been working on with obsidian, where I noticed like the way that I really love the way that obsidian fractures, and I tried to fight that at first. It's really kind of like difficult to work with in a way, but then I started to just lean into that and try to figure out how can I control the fractures. So I'm kind of exposing it to the surface. So it's kind of similar in the way that flint knapping, like exposing that fracture and controlling the fracture. So for this series, I scanned my dogs, Apollo and Loma, and traced. I 3D printed them, traced them on the obsidian, and then into the stone I chiseled out their imprints. So I carve in lines, and then it has a grid structure where I then chip away the stone, and that kind of exposes that breakage, the fracture. And I was thinking about kind of like the shadows of the dogs and the psychopomp, which so just kind of like conceptually wanted to talk about psychopomp. When I looked into that a little bit more, like what dogs represented, the psychopomp is a guide that threads us between the opposites of internal darkness and light and life and death. And thinking about the dog as one who guards and guides and holds us. And it's a really reciprocal relationship where we must, in return, protect and guide them. So this is my latest series of explorations, and you'll find similar examples of these at the artist market outside. I have a table of a few pieces out there. I hope you will come and visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Luci. Next up, we have Marge Hinge. Marge creates evocative jewelry that captures the wonders of Earth's materials and transforms them into empowering adornments. She wanted to find a way to take the beauty of a piece of stone and make it wearable without the barriers of metal, beyond acting as artworks. Her pieces serve as wearable talismans. Welcome, Marge.
Hi, I'm Marge. I'm a lapidary artist who wanted to find stone without the barriers of metal. It all started here at the Woods of upstate New York. I was fascinated by the natural world. I was always creating and making. I was finding stones on the beach. I remember every week on the Cape, I remember finding I was bringing home one bucket of rocks, and I would look at them daily. I also carried around with flowers. I was always creating, so I went to art school at Pratt Untitled Chapter, fell in love with jewelry. I took the metalsmithing course, and decided it was a 2-year program, and decided to transfer to Boise to be able to study raw materials, to be able to study textiles, glass, and just really experience the materials. Sorry, some of these got cut off, but my first semester busy, I really wanted to get a new glass blowing class, but nothing full. So the only class I could take was glass woodworking, which is the grinding and polishing course, which is kind of the same as stone. It was an SPS thing. 2 weeks into the semester, I fell from the hill and broke my arm. So I had to do the entire semester on my own for the winter semester. My professor was from New York, he came up once, and I had occasional help from the tech, but I really learned the techniques for myself, which was great for me. At the same time, I was starting to set stones. So while I was on break, I went back to my friend John Luci's shop. He's our hardcore diving miner who had cabs that I was buying, but he also had a rough material counter, which started my love of stones. Here's some of the one on the top right and the bottom middle left are some of the first pieces I ever carved. I was really experimenting with structure and exploring materials. The first one is faceted on one side, and if you flip it over, it's all on the outside. And the other one, I was just playing with carving and figuring out materials. In school, I also fell in love with electroforming. I was putting sealed feathers because organic material is not supposed to work in the bath. It literally usually disintegrates. So for some reason, I one day didn't cover all the feathers and learned that feathers do not react. So I was playing with colors and textures, working on some larger scale pieces for my degree project, but I was also making these small scale pendants and earrings that I would sell at student markets, as well as larger scale with big peacocks. Sorry. My larger work explored colors, textures, and forms. I loved making movement and trying to mimic colors. After graduating, I had the opportunity to share a studio with a couple friends. I honestly sat on it for a few years. I didn't really make work. I was just trying to figure out life, but I knew I was going to want it when the time came. And I'm still in the same studio 15 years later. And about 2 years after graduating, I was approached by Anthropology to sell the feathers for collection for them. They placed a small order, but sadly, immediately shipped it to Tucson. They made my beautiful feathers into cast pieces and little keychains. Feathers. Dyed feathers. Once I figured out I was copying, I refused to make the feathers for them, but I created a completely different collection based on woodblock stamps that I found in Virginia. This order really taught me so much about production and how to make multiples. Because of that opportunity, when the neighboring jeweler, Chris Kluth, from Glasswood shop I was working at, was moving studios and decided to downsize, I was able to purchase many of the library tools and started working with sewing again. I went straight to my studio and started making the rings. They were very outrageous and large, like you see here. And I also wanted to build a larger collection, so I started making earrings at first with beach stones. At that time, I worked with any material I could get my hands on. I didn't really know about the gem show or what the possibilities were, so embarrassingly, I mainly bought cheap dies of small pieces of rough on Amazon. I was really just carving holes into the stone itself, and the shapes that were made from that, these pieces were much more sculptural and not necessarily simple. During that time, I also worked for designing for larger brands and was actually fired for not copying the creative work of some of my friends. I had the opportunity to go vend in a show called Echo Park Cracker in LA. It was a really great time to show off my work to a new crowd. LA was very different from the Rhode Island, New York market that I was selling in, and I remember my first show I went to get lunch. I got back and a woman handed me 10 rings and was like, "Oh, okay, I'll take these," which blew my mind at the time. Because of the buzz around that show and being seen on the New Coast, I was asked to wholesale to stores. This was a really wonderful store. Is a really wonderful store called Travel Legal in San Francisco. You can see still, they don't necessarily look comfortable, but they were really fun pieces to make. I started making as much as I could, still sculptural, but starting to use more form stones and doing a lot more colorful stud earrings. In 2017, I was invited to vend in Tucson. I was so excited and was encouraged by so many people around me but it was at the Jog Show, which was, if you know the Jog Show, not the right place for my work. It was sadly not the experience I had hoped for, and I left early because I was in a sea of handmade. I was in a market supposedly about handmade pieces, but in a sea of things that were mass produced overseas. And most of the vendors ended up hopping shows to a different show that were in the same room as me. So I was all alone. But it was a wonderful time to experience the Joe Show. I ran into a former professor, Lola Brooks, who was like, "Why are you making figures of movement? I know that was a big thing of your work earlier." And she told me to get over my third glue and start making bigger pieces. Thanks to Lola and the stones I found on that trip, I started making drop earrings and learning fast how important weight was to wearability. I really learned how to refine the stones. In 2018, I started making necklaces, but started to sell them because of how much work went into them. There were so many tiny holes. I started getting broader equipment, and a 10-inch slab saw gave me much more ability to control my cutting, and the more stones the markets I got into, the more my confidence grew. This was from the West Coast Craft in San Francisco, back when flat-gray and carnelian were easy to carve and not so over-processed that they shatter almost instantly when cut. I feel like stones have changed a lot over the years and how they are extracted. I started experimenting with more color and scale. In 2019, I left my part-time job at the Rizzi Museum shop to work on jewelry full-time. In 2020, I got a design catalyst grant from the state of Rhode Island, which was, the timing was perfect. It was 6 months of business classes, a mentorship, and $15,000 to fund my business. I had proposed to do a shop object on the sale show at the time, but it ended up being the same weekend as my brother's wedding. I changed my mind last minute and decided to go to Tucson. Oh, and this is what I got. This is the first batch. Large rough that I was able to cut. Thankfully, I did that because immediately after the world shut down, I had all these stones and I had just found in the grant classes to keep me going. I was living alone at the time, so I spent my days in the studio just playing and experimenting, using different stones, different colors, just really playing with what I had. With the grant, I was able to purchase a 16-inch slab saw. It was a year late because of COVID, but it is one of the best tools I own. I am able to now control what kind of material I buy and how I can cut it. With this tool, you can control how thick the slabs are, which is really amazing for what I do. In 2022, I was able to return to Tucson and get more large stones and start cutting more and more. Every year, I did an online trade show and got back to in-person markets. Every year I work with new materials and get to explore what works for what I do. Sometimes it doesn't work, but it's really fun to play with all the colors that come out here. The same year I was approached by 3 people. While I was hesitant to get copied again, I knew so much more about production and what I was making, and I went into it with a fresh perspective. I made them 3 different collections because of this, I learned so much about the materials, sourcing for larger projects, and how finicky stone can be. This Brazilian raspberry I had never used before, and it is not as stable as it looks. But I was able to make an entire collection. Every collection I made for them was really so special. It really helped me to refine my skills, my time management, and really figure out my process. Doing size rings like this were very hard in stone, but it was really good practice in production. Here's some of the final pieces I made for them. We did some earrings, some rings, lots of different bright colors. In 2023, I had just gotten a few large wholesale orders and went a little wild in Tucson. I spent time really getting to know the miners, the versions of the stones, and buying directly from the people who mark stones. We ended up shipping a pallet of 682 pounds of rough back. This is a lot of material. I've been working at it for the past 2 years, and I'm just starting to run out. I did not get nearly as much this year, but because I already had a beautiful foundation of all these pieces to work with. Here's a favorite reading from some of the pieces I got on that trip, the Botswana agate. Here I am working in my studio. Every ring starts and finishes in that pine district. Drill, core, and slowly manipulate them with my foot shaft. Excuse the dirty saw, but I love how much every piece of stone is different. It has so much depth in it. I always remind myself that Mother Nature made these pieces and I just get to play with them. Every time you cut a slab, each one is different, and it's so incredible to see. When you buy a large piece of rock, you don't actually know what's going to be inside the middle. You can kind of guesstimate, but it's really great to see the progression of how pieces come through. I love to see how they work in this place. I've evolved over time. Lately, I've been really wanting the pieces to feel like they are either in a terrarium or part of a natural history museum. And also just refining how I photograph my work and how people see the raw materials of people places. Yeah, it's really cool to see the slab that some stuff. Last year I started I'm trying to use as much material as I can that I have. I don't want anything to go to waste, so I started making my end cuts into candle holders and exploring how to best use everything I have in the studio. And I'm starting to really build collections around 1 or 2 stones at a time. This is all made from the same piece of juicy gooseberries. This year I also worked with an incredible model and got some really wonderful photo shoots. Just to show off the different sets and be like, I don't know. And now I'm starting to work more with tiny gemstones and finer materials. This was half my focus of this Tucson trip, and it was really exciting to get to work with these new materials. The tiny stones are very delicate and really hard to drill, but it's so rewarding when they finally work out. Those green tourmalines right there. I've had at least 5 of them trying to figure it out, but now got it down. I have some pieces outside with me, and like I tried to on. Let's see what it is first thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. Next, we have Tuggle Designs. Tuggle Designs is founded by husband and wife team, Matthew and Lauren Tuggle. It is driven by passion for unique handcrafted jewelry. Their work is a modern take on traditional design, guided by color, contrast, and negative space. They are committed to preserving the artistry of handcrafted jewelry and forego CAD in favor of traditional fabrication, hand engraving, and advanced stone setting. Each piece reflects their dedication to exceptional craftsmanship, resulting in bold, timeless heirlooms. Thank you so much.
I'm Lauren, this is my husband Matt, and as they just said, we are custom jewelers who really love creating handcrafted pieces that really are meant to stand the test of time. We really believe in kind of taking things back to the roots and doing things by hand, so we love that we build in-house and build our pieces from scratch. So that kind of becomes the main focus of what we do and how we drive our business.
Yeah, we wanted to come today and talk about finding your niche and kind of setting yourself apart like very saturated.
You know, we're all increasingly working on a global scale and kind of compete with people that, as has already been mentioned by a couple of artists, that can maybe take your ideas and run with them in maybe using cheaper labor or something where you might feel some fear in actually sharing collections that you've created or things that you don't want ripped off by somebody else. And so first off, it's like, what is a niche? Being able to create that niche for yourself, you have a lot of questions that you have to ask. And what makes you unique and sets you apart from the rest of the jewelers out there. We're in just outside of Denver, Colorado, where there's a huge amount of independent designers and up and coming this and that. For those that are in our age range, it's not uncommon to find new jewelers that are entering the market. And especially with CAD, everybody's got a computer today, they can hop on and everybody thinks that they can be a designer and create pieces, and it's not always the case. So the few things that you really gotta kind of think about is, well, first, what's your focus?
Yeah, but what do you love doing? What kind of focus do you want to do?
You know, what types of unique styles and techniques are you going to use on your jewelry that makes it feel unique to you? One of the things that we find a whole lot is that our finishes actually create a cohesive nature between all of our works. One thing that's actually been really rewarding now that we've been in our career for quite some time is the last 5 years, and this comes to me every single year, we have more and more people that say, I saw a picture of your work and I knew it was a Tuggle before I even saw the name. And that's a very rewarding thing to have somebody notice and be able to put together your collection without actually knowing that it is truly your piece, without seeing that. And finding your niche and being able to put together your unique styles, textures, finishes that can create that cohesion across all of the different bodies of work that you do.
And then I would say another thing when you're establishing your niche is to establish kind of what your target audience is and who those people are that are going to resonate with your pieces. And you may not know that right away at first, and that's something that kind of happens naturally, but it's a good thing to pay attention to as you're exploring what your niche is.
All of these things boil down to how do you create that authenticity for who you are as an artist to be able to market it and sell it, to create a focus that you actually like and want to run in that vein, and creating those finishing techniques that does appeal to a larger audience, but still staying true to your design voice and the things that you value most. I kind of joke that half of my job is education because people don't know what it takes to do handmade, especially in the US. There are very few jewelers out there that do fabricate their pieces from start to finish anymore, and that can do it in any sort of sense of scale. And so constantly refining and going back to what are the core beliefs that I have and how do I bring those through in my work, and people that can connect with that, it all feels seamlessly like the most important way to drive your business forward and keep evolving as an artist.
And so I would say for us, the custom process has really helped us find our niche. We start with some designs for a client. If they come to us, they'll come with like a theme or they have a sentimental stone that they want used or some kind of starting point to kind of get us going in the design process.
It could be colors, it could be a place, it could be, we have this is our webpage. I apologize, we don't have a full presentation to give you in terms of photos today, but people can go on our website and there's a design inquiry page. And on that, it asks a bunch of generic questions that help us get to know our clients since we work with so many from afar. And sometimes I get a chapter book. They tell me everything. They tell me things I would never even think to ask, but it really gives me insight to who the couple is, what they might value, and all kinds of information that I can pull from to infuse that into their piece. So we might start with 4 or 5 designs. We take what we know about them and take what we have found works really well for us, and we infuse that into maybe 4 or 5 designs. Decision fatigue is a thing. You give too much to your clients and they get overwhelmed by that, as we all can. And from there, we might refine it down to look at it. And most people have a very strong sense of 1 to 2 designs. This is absolutely, I want number 4, but let's take the setting style or some of the coloration from number 1. We mix and match until we land on the perfect thing that speaks to them. And from there, we'll put up the piece, we tap down, and we start the process. But in doing that, there might be 4 or 5 designs that we never use, right? But all of those things help us refine our aesthetic and develop what feels most important to us in sharing that with the world. Because I don't know how many of you sat down and said, I'm going to design a piece today, and you look at that blank canvas, and it's a little bit daunting. You feel a little bit of the pressure of what am I going to bring to the table? What am I going to do today? And especially relating that to a client, it can be difficult. So getting those little nuggets and pieces of information from them can really help develop that idea. One piece that I talk about a lot actually is this dragonfly wedding set. The client came to me with her mother's wedding set, yellow gold. She knew she wanted purple and she wanted dragonflies and 2-tone gold. This was from years ago, so I'm sitting there thinking at the time, how are we going to blend dragonflies with a fine piece of jewelry that's going to age really well, something that is timeless and beautiful. And it was infused with a lot of emotion. And for them, we do feel but this kind of ticks all those boxes. It's got the two-tone metals that they wanted, all the yellow gold is from this sentimental from her mother's wedding set. We put in the dragonflies. It has every element that they wanted, but with the flavor of us. And so that's really what it's about. You teach them that these are the things that are important, and we're taking your story and infusing it into the piece and thinking about the client at every step of creation, which for them feels very special. They're being heard, they get to be a part of our process, but it's also them getting inside of our head and owning a little piece of us. Because I don't believe that just jewelry is about selling the piece. Your client is buying in, they want a piece of you as well. And like Shane talked about storytelling, yes, you are definitely trying to sell somebody something, but for us it goes deeper than that, and we have to really feel good and enjoy the process because it's invaluable without that. It's about that like deeper meaning and connecting to our clients. It's not always about the money. Okay, on that note, creativity is a muscle. You gotta flex it, you gotta work it. You can't just expect to sit down and every single time you want to create, the creative juices are gonna flow in the same capacity. It doesn't always happen like that. And so sitting down for us, the custom process has been invaluable because it forces us to create designs that we wouldn't necessarily do. But we get to transform them and take bits and pieces that make it feel like us, but with our client's vision. And over time, that has helped us refine our own aesthetic, bring in the things that feel true to who we are, and also tolerances of metal, things that are gonna last. We want our pieces to be as solid as today as they are 100 years from now, and when we're long gone, as long as somebody takes care of them, they will hold up, hold well, and still tell that story many years later.
So next that brings us to the challenges of like the digital age and having all of your stuff on social media and everybody can see it, and kind of the importance of establishing that niche to kind of separate you from everybody else.
Yeah, it's tough. We see a lot these days jewelers that really have a fear of sharing their work, whether they're working on a collection and I'm hoard it and not share with everybody until it's the perfect thing to do, or how do I trademark or copyright or protect myself in all these great ways. And well, that's a nice idea. It's hard to do so. And you don't have to change something by very much to not get in trouble legally, right? And so big piece of advice, and I remember once, many years ago, that I was a little bit miffed that I saw somebody out there that had a design that was very similar to ours, and I go to Matt and share that, what are we gonna do? What can we do? And he's like, there's no time for that kind of energy. As long as we keep innovating and creating and evolving our art, we're gonna stay one step ahead. They're gonna be chasing our coattails, and what we did in the past, that's old news. It's already been done. Who cares? And I love that mindset because it allows you to step outside of something that's very limiting and constantly be growing and creating and building your art in ways that, again, feel really authentic to you. And who cares about anybody else? The internet's not going away. The digital age isn't going away. It's only going to get worse. So, you embrace it and you keep moving forward and pushing into what feels right for you as an artist.
And I would say creating and keeping creating kind of evolves what your niche is, and it just kind of naturally develops. So you may not even realize that you are starting to develop this niche, and then you look back at maybe your old sketches throughout the years and you're like, oh, it kind of was there. Now I do see all these similarities that I didn't notice at first.
That was very much true of our work. For the longest time, I would say to Matt that I'm not sure who we are, who we want to be, what kind of direction we want to take it, and we literally would do that. Go back through and look through old sketchbooks and all of the things that we've done along the way, and we start to notice, it was always there all along. We just had to really dig in and refine what that was in order to connect with our people. And so, in closing, one of the ways that we've really found success is just by constantly revisiting and coming back to our core values. What do we care about most as artists, and how do we make sure to share that with people and make them care about it just as much? I start almost every single custom design consultation with, What is your lifestyle? How do you wear your pieces? And what are the most important things to you? Is it color? Is it size? And then let me take those things and blend it into a piece that was made 100% just for that client. And we're unique in that most of the work that we make is one of a kind. But even when you're talking about a larger production methods, things like that, always bring it back to what's most important for me, and don't ever sacrifice some of those things. Don't ever allow yourself to, I'm just going to put out this tube work made by this other manufacturer because I want to make a quick buck. Always remember, who do I want to stay true to as an artist, because you have to live in your own head.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you need to enjoy what you're doing, and if you do enjoy what you're doing, then that's really all that matters.
One thing I love to chat with clients in particular, but also other jewelers, is that there's very few material objects that live their lives apart, that live their lives on it. When it comes to bridal pieces, like all of your energy and experiences, no matter whether you believe that or not, a little bit of it's infused into the piece. And being able to become a part of somebody's story. Almost every custom piece is born out of something beautiful, whether marriage, celebrating a baby, even on the sad side of things when the loved one has passed. Being able to maybe melt down those pieces and help them move forward into a new chapter of life in a way that offers closure and that other material objects don't, it's really special. So we all get to work in an industry that is inherently really important, but also a luxury. And so I always really try to remind myself of the history that comes with that, like what service we truly provide to the world in being a part of the storytelling of families and connecting people with their ancestors in an interesting and cool way. So find your niche, enjoy the process, and never stop creating. The good days, the bad days, the ugly days, create in all of those, and that emotion and expression will come forward. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Our final artist talk is by Ope Omojola, the jewelry designer behind Octave Jewelry. Octave was the result of a lifelong creative practice prioritizing materiality, color, and movement. A student of anthropology, Ope first picked up a soldering torch at a weekly class at the 92nd Street Y. Years of independent experimentation and exploration led to Octave's signature style, creating work sculptures that speak to personal style, history, and sentimentality. Ope was born in Nigeria and lives in Luxembourg, New York. Please join me in welcoming Ope.
Ope Omojola. My jewelry brand is called Octave Jewelry. I'm a metalsmith and lapidary based in Brooklyn, New York, and it's an honor to be here with all of you today. So when I first learned how to silversmith, I was a little bit overwhelmed by the possibilities in metal. Stock metal is an incredible blank slate. Through reading books, learning about other jewelers' work, I couldn't believe that flat sheet and coiled wire could become so many things. But for me, metal was a tricky partner. My brain wanted a bit of constraint to push against and work around. And as I spent more independent time in the studio, I started making scrap projects for time, which meant basically I would show up to the studio, I'd open up my toolbox with random scraps for other projects, and I would challenge myself to finish something wearable by the end of the studio session using only detritus from past projects. That work became some of my first collection, and some of those pieces are still some of my most popular today. So these are a couple of examples of my scrap projects. There's a necklace of a torque with like a little connected piece and a little ring on it, and then the other piece is a pin or a brooch. These are another couple of those early scrap projects. These I would still continue to sell on my website, but when I first learned how to make jewelry, that was kind of how I got myself into the design process. I would create a constraint and then work with it. When I learned how to work in stone, something really shifted for me. Metal might have been my first crush, but stone was my true love. Lapidary is noisy but meditative. messy, but really satisfying. And while stone is incredibly unforgiving, I found it to be very, very rewarding. While metal is infinitely renewable, where the same material can be melted and reused for an eternity, stone crumbles away as we shape it into our vision. And that permanence has always left me in awe. Most of all, through lapidary, design became a multi-directional conversation between me and my materials, instead of just being an exercise of my will and my vision. And I liked having that conversation. So here are some of my first projects that I did with lapidary. I tried to think of different types of settings or different types of ways that I could let the stone breathe, I suppose. And my style generally is pretty simple, pretty minimal. So what I think about a lot is the way that minerals and gems, they're so abundant in color and pattern, but they still have limitations in terms of which colors you find, where the patterns are in the material, where there are holes or cracks that you have to work around. And that challenge, the investigation and conversation of lapidary, is what really animates me and makes creativity a process of discovery. The trick was then turning that discovery into a style. And as any studio jeweler understands, translating your own style, your own creative dreams into something that people actually like to buy and wear. So these are some of my, I focus mostly on earrings. And so these are some other experiments from the early days in the studio. There's rutilated quartz on the other side, and I wanted to, set it in a way that let the light shine through that beautiful material. And I like that the gold and the rutile and the silver, I like that idea of mixing metals, but it's stone and metal, but you're also mixing metals in terms of tones at the same time. And then in these charm hoops on the other photo, I came to Tucson for the first time and I found these gorgeous quartz nuggets. And I loved the way that the rough edges looked, and I didn't want to lose that. But I also wanted them to, be wearable. So I sliced them and drilled them and sort of created these interchangeable charms. So different little projects like that. How do I keep as much of the material as possible, but also do it in a way that somebody might be able to wear to their office job or something like that? That sort of process really excites me. So these are more of my sort of staple styles. They're very straightforward, but what I love is the way that these stark shapes can kind of create a real picture of what the stone has to offer. I remember coming to Tucson for the first time and only then really realizing the vastness of all of the world's mineral offerings. And whether it's, what seems like a mountain of melee, these tiny little faceted stones, or these geodes that you see at these shows that are like a story tall. Tucson was the first place that I thought to myself, maybe we could leave more of this in the ground. There's so much of it. And it is so incredible to think about the sheer amount of human labor and care and curiosity that goes into bringing all of this out of the ground and turning it into things that we use in our home, things that we adorn ourselves with. But what I thought most of all is that if we are going to dig it up, which isn't stopping anytime soon, what can I do to feel like I'm honoring this incredibly ancient material that I am allowed to witness in the course of a moment? So these are some more, as I started trying to think about different types of connections and wanted to bring more kinetic forms into my work. These are another couple of experiments with different stones that I found while in Tucson. So as my business started to grow, I started asking myself certain questions. It's one thing to make something once and love it, but it's another thing to commit to making something again and again and again for different customers, for different stores. And so I asked myself, if you are still doing lapidary at a larger scale, when there are so many cabochons that you could be buying instead, why is that so important to you? And a lot of what was important to me was this idea of choice, of being able to think of the color or the pattern in stone as paint in a palette. You're creating a picture. You're putting these different colors together to tell a story. You're putting these patterns together to tell a story. I asked myself, what is it that you want to expose or show in the material that you think you're specially placed to do? There are a lot of people who are much better metalsmiths than I am. My style is quite simple, and I love it that way. But what I'm allowed to do with such a simple metalsmithing style is to really show the different types of patterns and colors that often get ignored because in sort of a world of calibrated gems, we end up focusing on very specific ideas of which colors, which patterns, which stones have value, and which stones are beautiful. And then the last question, of course, was, there is a big difference between my creative fantasy and what somebody might wear on a random Wednesday to their job, between errands and obligations. So how can you bring a sense of fantasy and bring a sense of awe in what the world has to offer into the mundane parts of a person's life? Thinking about, it's one thing to make something one time. So I think this pair of earrings was one of the first times that I tried this 7 style. And then it's another thing to say, I want to do this again and again and again. Sometimes I might come up with a style because the stone came in that shape and I just wanted to cut as little of it as possible. But then when I do it again, I'm working with different types of material. I'm buying slabs instead of working with scrap. And I've tried now to bring more of that scrap project mentality into my production work. I try to use as much of every slab as possible, both to minimize waste and also as sort of like a creative head scratcher. Like, if maybe 20% of this is supposed to be yield, if like a small amount of a slab is supposed to be beautiful, what can I do with it? What shapes can I cut that into to show people that so much more of it can be beautiful than they might have initially thought? Here are a couple of collections. What I like to do sometimes is create a collection around a single stone and show it in a number of different shapes, in a number of different versions of that stone, because I think a lot of people, especially if you don't work in jewelry, especially if you're not that familiar with certain materials, you might not realize, the same stone can appear in different locations across the world and have different, properties or different colors. So on this side is chrysoprase. I think most of this material is from Tanzania, but the slabs that they're sitting on include Brazilian and Australian material as well. And so there's the part of the jewelry that is making it and, getting it to wear it. But then there's also the part that's educating people about, this comes from somewhere. The way that the earth moved to form this material, might have happened in multiple places across the globe. And maybe at the time it was happening, they were in the same place. And as the earth has moved, so have these minerals. And now we have exposed them and we get to enjoy how time and space have changed their properties. Meanwhile, on the other side, these are all pieces using Moonlight jasper, which only this form of jasper only appears in Australia, but there are different color stories from the sort of paler, purple with the beige to that more ochre yellow with burgundy. And I wanted to be able to show, the same, I'm saying, the same material can mean so many different things. The same material can show up in so many ways, and that's exciting instead of a problem. For better or worse, a large part of our industry is reliant on resource extraction, whether that's metal, stone, or the materials that go into the consumables that we use during the creative process. I am so excited that there are so many organizations who focus on sustainability and ethical stewardship. And in my own studio, I'm interested in a thought process that aligns my creativity with a different idea of resource stewardship. Respecting materials as we receive them, and rethinking our sense of what is beautiful and what gives materials value. There can be so much waste created in service of turning naturally variable materials into visually consistent cut stones. I've come to find a lot of pleasure in offcuts, in using the ugly little bits, or the parts of the stone that get less attention. So this is a pair of sort of freestyle custom earrings that I made using, a lot of aquamarine, or not a lot of it, but the way that I use the aquamarine and the imperial topaz especially, I left the raw edges on the side and onset them so that I could show those rough edges. I kept behind the rose quartz and the rutilated quartz, the backs are rough, so it keeps that texture, and since they're translucent stones, that comes through when you're wearing them. The light reflects off of the raw surface of the stone. And yeah, I love being able to sort of play the light in those stones and those rough edges with smoother, more minimal shapes, which is what I'm more accustomed to working with. Something I say often about my business and what I do is that it is a frame for Earth's ancient works of art. So as my practice evolves, I want to design around these sort of piles of rock and these little slivers that get left over on my lapidary table. What can I do with those little moments of gorgeous color that might still make somebody happy? And not only these questions turn me back to metal. How can I find new ways to frame what I find? So this is an example of, these are all mother of pearl, the stone. So it's a little bit different from something that's stuck out because mother of pearl is one of the only stone materials that comes from a living being. This isn't fossilized or silicated material. But I use a lot of mother of pearl in my work, and so I have, I buy these big shells and I have to cut them down, and so I need to come up with different ways to use all of those little extra pieces of shell. So here's another example. On that side is a pair of earrings that's one of my most popular styles, and I use freshwater mother of pearl, golden mother of pearl, there's abalone up top, and I end up with all of these cut shells afterwards. So I started trying to come up with other ways to be creative with that material. I'm working on doing hand-carved mother of pearl spoons, which are typically used with caviar, but when I have a large shell and I only need the edges, I'm left with the centers, and that's a really great sort of blank to use to create something like these spoons. They're totally frivolous, but they can actually be used instead of just being waste in my studio, and they create something, even though it's technically waste, this is still something really luxurious that people can enjoy. Here's another example that I've been trying to come up with different ways of working with the negative space. So these are my seeing stones. They are an eagle eye pendant that comes from these naturally occurring orbicular formations in stone. So you can see how the slabs look before I work on them, and then in the end I end up with these eye shapes. And so now I have all of this material that I've decided to really zero in on these very specific points. And so a challenge that I've been thinking of is how to work with the rest of that material. So I'm experimenting more in the studio with inlay and with other ways of putting different sizes and types of stone together. And I'm having a lot of fun trying to figure that out, while also really enjoying these moments that are so special and don't occur very often in stones. Stone is an incredibly humbling material. Staring into a rough slab is coming to terms with millions of years of geological history, change, transformation, death, heat, and pressure. And I love the challenge of staring down at history and making it visible. Thanks for your time.